Hello everyone, welcome back to The Real Starfighter, and today we will be putting the Scum Y-Wing pilots into a tier list, including the contents from fugitives and collaborators. So just a quick rundown of the tier criteria if this is your first time watching one of my videos. A tier 3 pilot is a filler ship. A tier 2 pilot has an ability that's dependent on other ships and is only reliable during certain parts of the game. A tier 1 pilot has strong independency. It's great throughout the game, and it can perform multiple roles. A tier 0 pilot is an absolute game changer, can win the game all on its own. So starting off with tier 3, we have the slew of generics that the Y-Wing has for Scum. We're starting off with the Goon. Now the Goon is just a Goon. It's really there for filler. It's the definition of a pure filler ship. I really never see anyone fly the Goon because the Scum faction has better filler ships than the Initiative 1 Y-Wing. Now we get into some debate with the two Initiative 2s. There is a difference between the Janata Security Officer and the Hired Gun. The Janata Security Officer has a tech slot, and the Hired Gun has an EPT slot. So if you're centering a list around EPTs, you go for the Hired Gun, and if you're centering a list around a tech slot, then you go for the Janata Security Officer. If you're looking for both, you take the Amoxian Warrior. The Amoxian Warrior has an EPT slot and a tech slot. So the generic Y-Wings are there for filler depending on what you need. If you need someone for Cutthroat, you take the Hired Gun. If you're looking to make a tech-centered list, you make it either the Janata Security Officer or the Amoxian Warrior. For tier 2, we have two different pilots. First, we're going to start off with Paedric. Paedric is the definition of a tier 2 pilot ability. It is something that is a lot of work to set up, but doesn't really pay off for you and doesn't do a lot for your list in that moment in time. You have to spend your action to lock on to a device, and then when it detonates, every enemy ship, which is important, every enemy ship at range 0 to 1 of the device gains 1 strain token. I think it's fun. I think it could get your ships that are in that area out of a bad situation, but the bomb damage can still affect them. A lot of pilots and a lot of players now are very used to flying against bombs, so you may not hit anything. But it's still just, again, a very solid tier 2 ability that it's a lot of work for not a lot of result. And then we have Drea in tier 2 as well. While a friendly, non-limited ship performs an attack, if the defender is in your firing arc, the attacker may reroll 1 attack die. So they are a centerpiece. Drea is a centerpiece pilot. You build around them, and you're only flying generics. So they're the only named pilot. But I don't like the ability because you can't use it on yourself. So in the end game, you don't really have an ability that helps you push for game. You're basically just an initiative 4 trying to win the game purely on your initiative and piloting skill. And an initiative 4 in a Y-Wing, that's very difficult to do. But I do think it's a very good way to practice formation flying, focus fire. Drea really brings that skill set for more practice, and I think that's good for that, but not good for a majority of Scum X-Wing lists. And then tier 1, we have a really interesting batch of pilots. I'm going to start off with Arzeal. Arzeal feels like a tier 2 pilot, but has a tier 1 output. Now, what makes it tier 2 is this. You have to be damaged for both abilities to be active. I don't like being damaged. That's something that I think is a negative effect on the game, being damaged. And if you're critically damaged, then you're in a really rough spot. I also don't like that the second half of the ability reads, you have to change your eyeball results on your defense dice to blank results. Now, if you're being shot at through a gas cloud, sure, you can change that blank to an evade, but think about how many times that's often going to happen in a game when you're flying a Y-Wing. But what I do like that makes it tier 1 is that it's a passive, meaning I don't need a token for it to go off. I just need to be shooting in my front arc. So being able to change an eyeball result to a crit in my front arc is great because that means I'm prioritizing flying. I really pick the barrel roll over the focus as soon as I'm damaged. As long as I'm out of the opponent's firing arc more often than I am in it, then I think the reward is there. And because I preach that so much of arc dodging and getting out of the opponent's firing arc to push damage through, I think that's what becomes tier 1 for Arzeal. Now, again, it teeters right between tier 1 and tier 2. And I think the top ability has tier 1 implications, but a majority of the conditions for it to be tier 1 makes it tier 2. So just fly with care. It's going to feel like a tier 2 ship, but it has a tier 1 capability because it makes you focus on flying and arc dodging more. Next up, we have Cavil. Now, Cavil is another one that now feels like a tier 2 pilot with a tier 1 damage output. One thing that makes it tier 2 is that Cavil immediately needs a turret upgrade. Cavil's ability is only active when you have a turret upgrade, and just to put an upgrade to make a pilot's ability work already makes it tier 2. But because you're adding an attack die, and anything that adds a die is very, very, very powerful to me, I think that makes it tier 1. It's worth spending the 2 points on Dorsal Turret to get a 3-dice turreted weapon at that point. I think it makes a 2-point card very powerful. It makes the 5-point Ion Cannon turret also very powerful. I think a lot of players think Cavil kind of fell down a lot going into 2.0, but I think that's because Twin Laser Turret doesn't exist anymore. But I still think Cavil's a very powerful pilot because it turns 2 dice into 3 dice and 3 dice into 4 dice. So I think Cavil's definitely tier 1, but it does feel very tier 2 in the building stages and in the initial gameplay. And then at a solid tier 1 feel at all times is Lima K. Lima K's ability reads, before you engage, if you are not in an enemy ship's front firing arc, which I think is really cool, you may acquire a lock on the enemy ship in your 4 section. So I really like this because it specifies the primary firing arc, so even if they have a turret, you can be on the side, they can still be pointing at you, and you still get this ability off. But what I really like is it prioritizes and it rewards you for your positioning. If you go on the side of a ship, you're now able to take a target lock, and because that barrel roll is red, you really only want to use that barrel roll in sticky situations when you're in a Y-Wing. But in this case, you barrel roll a lot more than you don't, and you get a token for arc dodging. So I think that's a very rewarding thing for a tier 1 pilot to have. The action economy is there for a faction and for a ship that's not really famous for it. It sets up for torpedoes, it sets up for range 1. There's just a lot of implications for it, and I really do enjoy it. And you can even, use it on your turret, so if they're on the side of you, you can still utilize the ability. So Lima has so many implications with tier 1, and it feels very tier 1 and very powerful, so definitely a tier 1 pilot. For tier 0, we don't have any pilots. The Y-Wing in itself isn't really a tier 0 ship. It can't win the game on its own, and none of the pilots really feel that they can start and finish the game on their own as well. I think that the Scum faction has better things in it that are tier 0, that the Y-Wing is kind of, again, just a filler ship. It's there to maybe be a segue for newer players who know what the Y-Wing is from watching the movies to go, oh, this is a Y-Wing, I recognize this, I'm going to fly it. Or for someone who's been playing Rebels or even Republic, learning to play Scum, they go to it. I know for me, being a Rebel player, I do center around the Y-Wings and Scum a lot more than most true Scum players do. So anyway, that's just a quick recap of the Y-Wing tier list. There's tier 3 through 1. Again, we have no 0. I do think that the Y-Wing is a workhorse. I think it's very durable. It's a very reliable ship in terms of tiers of the ship itself. I think it's a tier 2, low tier 1 type ship just because it is very reliable. But I think that's more or less from my experience as a Rebel player. I'm not a Scum player. If I ever fly Scum, it's to be an aggressor. What that means is if someone says, hey, I need practice against this specific Scum list, can someone fly this specific Scum list against me so I can get practice against it? I'll usually fly it just so that we get to practice with it, and I understand it as well. I really don't gravitate towards this faction too much just because I'm a Rebel and Imperial and Resistance player. That's where I gravitate to begin with. But I do respect the Scum faction. I do respect that the Y-Wing is there for a durable filler ship. It reminds me of the F4 Phantom. The Y-Wing is comparable to the F4 Phantom because if it's going in for air-to-air purposes, ship to ship, I think it's really good. If it's going for air-to-ground, in terms of X-Wing, that means small base versus large base. I think it does that very well, but it does that role well. Whatever it goes into combat for, it does that well, but as soon as it's done that, It doesn't do anything else super well. It's basically trying to survive in the air-to-air battle because you spent all those points on taking out larger ships as opposed to taking out smaller ships. But if you send it in a battle to take out smaller ships, then it does that very well as well. It's a reliable ship, but whatever you send it in for, you're sending it in for that purpose. Thank you guys so much for watching. If this video helped you out, make sure you share it with a friend. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. This place crawls, and remember to always check your 6.